This is really interesting to me. A former QAnon supporter went on CNN and is going to explain how it's possible to deconvert people like her.
So, Melissa, what is your advice to other people who may have a family member or friends who have fallen into QAnon?
You know, I speak to people every day, family members who say, what advice can you give my friend? Can you talk to my loved one, my sister, my mother? And it's heartbreaking. It gives me chills just thinking about it, because I know that these people have to be empowered to make the conscious choice to leave the cult themselves. The more that people, berate them, call them names, call them stupid, laugh at them, mock them, they are just going to dig their heels in harder and become more isolated, more scared, and more alone. So my advice is to love these people, understand these people, try to come to even ground and reason with them as best you can, find things, common ground, things that you can agree on, and start there and really try to isolate what their fears are and what's motivating the irrational behavior and obsession with QAnon, because what you'll probably find out, it is motivated by fear, distrust, uncertainty, not necessarily hatred, not necessarily destruction, but these people can be helped, but they have to be empowered to do so.
Wow, that is such good advice. Compassion and focus on their fears.
This clip is actually very informative. So, how do you approach people that have some sort of extreme ideology? And this actually doesn't just apply to people with extreme ideologies. It applies across the board. In my opinion, it all comes down to intentions and whether or not they have bad faith or good faith. If somebody's acting in good faith, whether they're a QAnon believer or fill in the blank with whatever ideology, however extreme you want to go, if they're approaching it in good faith, and it's not like literally genocidal, well, then you have to treat it like she described, which is these people, a lot of people feel isolated, they feel alone. This is coming from a place of fear and distrust and uncertainty. And so you have to meet sincerity with compassion, and you have to almost reassure them and let them know that I don't think you're actually a bad person. I'm not attacking you as a person. I want to discuss these ideas with you and see what you really believe, and I'll tell you what I really believe, and I'll give you evidence for my worldview. And so I'll treat you like a human, and I'll treat you like an adult, where I'm not going to immediately break out the shame tactic, this finger wagging and overly moralizing sentiments. I think that that's where people shut down immediately. That if you attack them, if you attack their being for what they believe, then they're immediately going to shut down and they're going to tell you to go fuck yourself. But again, if you recognize that a lot of people who have extreme beliefs are isolated, alone, they're fearful, they distrust the dominant narratives, which actually is fair. It makes sense to distrust the overarching narratives and the conventional wisdom. They just maybe come to the wrong conclusions, and they have uncertainty. If you approach these people and you soak all that in and adjust accordingly, you'd be surprised how many minds you can change. So, but now on the flip side of that, if somebody has bad intentions in the sense that they're acting in bad faith, then I say unleash the hounds. You know what I mean? So in other words, when you talk about some ghoul elected Republican politician who's swimming in money from the military-industrial complex and Wall Street and you name it with the special interests, when it's a corporate Democrat who's swimming in money from the military-industrial complex and Wall Street, and they're really serving those donors above and beyond their constituents. In a situation like that, that person doesn't have good intentions. They don't have good faith. They're deeply corrupt, and they've sold out. And so in that instance, no, you don't meet them with kindness and compassion. You call it out for what it is and say, you're a bad actor. And so break out that shame tactic, that shame technique. Rub it in their face. You know what I mean? You're my enemy. No holds barred. I'm going after you. That's when you use those techniques. But for everybody else, if they're coming from a place of good faith and good intentions, and they just happen to go down a rabbit hole where they believe some things that are wacky, it takes a totally different approach. It takes an open-minded, open-hearted approach, and it takes engaging like human beings. And again, people can wind up in some very kooky places. QAnon is as kooky as it gets. There's a lot of ideologies out there that are as kooky as it gets. But I actually have a decent amount of faith that deconversion is possible in a very large percentage of people. There's always going to be the TFGs, the too far gones, but more people have hope than you think. And it's just a matter of engaging with it in a productive way. I'm reminded of, what's his name? Daryl something. The guy, he's a black guy, and he was able to deconvert white people from the KKK. And he did it in the most common sense way imaginable, which is like, let me talk to him. Let me see what they're thinking. I'm going to tell them what I'm thinking. And let me leave the harsh judgments and the character attacks totally aside. And let's just look at this almost like a science experiment and see how far we can go. And then he was able to deconvert a large number of these people. So if that can happen, if a black man can deconvert some people from the KKK, there's a large percentage of people who can be deconverted from extreme ideologies. So it's just a matter of how do you do that? And you guys know this. I say it all the time that my proudest thing about this show is when I go to an event like Politicon or I'm out somewhere and somebody tells me, hey man, I used to be a Shapiro fan, or I used to be a Crowder fan, or in some instances, I used to be alt-right, and now I'm not. And the reason I'm not is because of you. Nothing makes me feel better than that. And interestingly, she actually alluded to this too. The thing that seems to be the most effective is when you're willing to be intellectually honest enough to concede a point where they already agree. So, for example, there's a lot of overlap when it comes to the issue of Julian Assange, for example, where you have like the libertarian right and some far right elements who want to see him pardoned, but you also have many on the left who want to see him pardoned. So the fact that there's already a point of agreement makes them go, hey, he's obviously not totally crazy, so why don't I listen to him on other topics as well? And then there's a process, and then you're off to the races. So in other words, there's a lot of power in giving credit where it's due. If you're one of these people who literally it's always black or white and there's never any gray area, and you never give credit where it's due, well, you're shooting yourself in the foot because you're never going to get more people to agree with you. And you're also just not engaging honestly at that point. If you can't say, hey, I disagree with you on 80% of stuff, but here's the 20% where we agree, then you're just being intellectually dishonest, and you want to play this partisan game of like, you're my complete enemy and you're my complete ally, which is silly because nobody 100% agrees with anybody, and nobody 100% disagrees with anybody. So anyway, that tactic of just being honest and giving credit where it's due usually makes people go, oh, that's curious. So I'll hear this guy out in other ways too, even when he disagrees with me. So then you're off to the races. It's a snowball effect, and you can change minds. So I think this clip is really important and really interesting because it's somebody who was deep in QAnon, was deconverted, and now they're saying this is how it gets done. And I think the advice is totally sound, but unfortunately, most people will ignore it, and most people will not approach it with this kind of open-minded view.